Good afternoon. It's Friday, the 12th of July 2019, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. Your host today, Mike Robinson, myself, Brian Gerrish, and we're joined by David Scott. And of course, David bringing us northern exposure from north of the border. Key thing, media freedom.
Yes, well, as we mentioned on Wednesday, over the Wednesday and Thursday this week, the Foreign Office of the UK and the Foreign Office of Canada running this joint event all about media freedom and defending media freedom. As you know, the question remains, why would the British Foreign Office be so keen to do this? Is this something that they've done in the past? I'm not really aware of that, but they seem to be concerned about it now. Well, anyway, they have issued a global pledge on media freedom. So let's have a look at that and see what they have to say. As governments, it is our responsibility to ensure that people in our countries can enjoy all their human rights and the benefits these bring to society. To focus on solving problems at home is not enough. Restrictive regulatory models can spread from one jurisdiction to the next. So this is coming from the government, which is about to impose a restrictive regulatory model on what people can do with respect to the media. Techniques of intimidation that originate in one community soon spread to another. Global digital media platforms are increasingly prevalent and bring with them not only promise of free discourse, but also the threat of unlawful surveillance and manipulation. And yet this government seems to be quite happy to permit GCHQ and the security services to unlawfully surveil people within the United Kingdom. So this is an incredible statement for the Foreign Office to have written and co-signed. They go on, we commit to speak out and take action together through a media freedom coalition that will make the case for the fundamental importance of media freedom for the security, prosperity and well-being of all societies, combine forces to share information as appropriate and take action on cases where journalists and media organisations are at risk, shine a light on violations and abuses of media freedom, bringing them to the attention of global public, stand together to intervene at the highest level with governments of countries where media freedom is at risk. Are they going to intervene with themselves? Possibly not. Consider all available measures to address violations and abuses of international human rights. They go on, we commit to harnessing the power of our diplomatic networks through a new media freedom contact group. So they're creating all kinds of new organisations so that our officials are instructed to work directly with those at risk to ensure we do no harm. Reach out to local journalists and civil society organisations to stay connected with those on the front lines, connect with local governments and look for solutions. Well, so that's all very good. In the meantime, Jeremy Wright had an announcement. He said, with rising disinformation and threats against the media, the UK's strong and independent press is a beacon of freedom, and this government is committed to supporting and preserving. So the UK is now establishing a national committee for the safety of journalists, and Jeremy Wright has announced this. It follows a recommendation to member states by the Organisation for Security and Cooperation in Europe, membership still to be decided, but the intention is to bring together representatives from journalism organisations and relevant government departments and so on. And then even more, because here is Amal Clooney saying the high-level panel of legal experts brings together leading international experts on media freedom, including judges, lawyers and academics from all over the world. I look forward to working alongside them to develop and advance legal frameworks that can help to protect media freedom around the world. So this is yet another group. This time it's called the High-Level Panel of Legal Experts. And she went on well, let's have a look at, we'll just mention who's on this. Of course, Lord Neuberger, formerly of the Supreme Court, is on that. Irwin Cotler from Canada. We've got people from Pakistan, South Africa. Amal Clooney, of course, is representing the UK. From the US, Baroness Helena Kennedy is also on there from the UK. But the one that really stuck out to me was, we've got India, Turkey and so on in there as well, but the one that stuck out to me was Galina Arapova from Russia, because I was surprised, bearing in mind that RT and Sputnik weren't actually allowed to take part in this event. I was surprised that there was some kind of Russian representation here, but it turns out she runs an NGO which has been named as a foreign agent NGO, all to deal with media freedom in Russia. But one of these NGOs that Putin clearly is not comfortable as having in the country, because he recognises it, or he believes that that is acting as a foreign agent.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Of course, the event could not have taken place without a section on navigating disinformation. They had that was chaired by the Canadian Foreign Minister. They had the Latvian Foreign Minister speaking at it. They had a representative of the Council on Foreign Relations on there, and a representative from the Office of the Special Rapporteur of Freedom of Expression. So I ask again, Brian and David, what this event was actually about, because all of a sudden the British government, very excited about media freedom and standing up for media freedom around the world. I'll just remind everybody who it is that was backing this event. Luminate, a world where people and institutions can work together to build just and fair societies. I believe what this is really about, I mean, I'm not in any way suggesting that we should be complacent about journalists ending up in prison or being tortured or being murdered in some cases. But I believe what this event was really about was the issue of disinformation and the issue of journalists who are working in foreign countries on behalf of the British Foreign Office and other governments around the world, who are at risk of being found out for doing what they're doing, and therefore being in danger in the countries that they're acting in. So, David, I don't know if you saw what we covered on this on Wednesday, but what are your thoughts on this event?
It's incredible. You asked, what is it? I would say, based on what I've learned from our friends in the Integrity Initiative, this is hybrid warfare. This is organising the state. We're going to protect press freedom by getting all the journalist organisations to liaise with the government departments, because that defends press freedom. And then we're going to have an organisation called Luminate. We're not going to call it Illuminati, because that's just too obvious. And we're not going to call it Lucifer, because that's just too obvious. But we'll use a word that's a synonym for both of these. Right, okay. And we're going to protect human rights, not God-given inalienable rights, human rights, which are granted by governments. And then the whole implication here is it's global. That what is allowed to be said, what is true and what is disinformation, is going to be defined on a global scale. I don't think that's what I would define as protecting free press.
No, indeed. And we'll be talking a little bit more about that in the extra time section later on.
I'm going to say I certainly agree with that. I think this is the emperor's no clothes stage. It's becoming ever more obvious that what we've got is a global dictatorship building itself, and it must be in control of every single thing that's said on media, where if it's mainstream media or social media, the government, the world government, ultimately needs to be in control. Let's have a look at what's happening behind the scenes. We just jump back here to 2018. This is 23rd of July 2018, and the A Register here pointing out that the Investigatory Powers Tribunal has re-ruled that GCHQ, MI5 and MI6 were engaged in, quote, indiscriminate and illegal bulk cable tapping surveillance for 15 years. But what's remarkable about the article is, if you read it, it has a lot of detail in it. The judge says, well, they were guilty, but what can you do? So this sets out that we now have state agencies which are not only breaking the law, they are above the law. We'll just highlight that bit there. So GCHQ, MI5 and MI6. But it gets better, because this is a truly excellent article which you can find on the World Socialist website. What's the headline? UK's GCHQ spy centre seeks new powers to circumvent encryption. And so basically GCHQ is now coming forward and saying, well, we need to be able to get in on any conversation we want to. I'd really encourage people to go and read this article, because there's so much information in it. But let's just have a look at a bit of it. Basically, what GCHQ is proposing would require service providers to surreptitiously inject a new public key into a conversation in response to a government demand. This would turn a two-way conversation into a group chat where the government is the additional participant, or add a secret government participant to an existing group chat. A beautiful way that this article has phrased this, because you're talking to a friend, possibly you're talking to a group of friends, and somebody else joins your conversation, and that's going to be the British government or one of its agencies. Second, in order to ensure the government is added to the conversation in secret, GCHQ's proposal would require messaging apps, service providers and operating systems to change their software so that it would, one, change the encryption schemes used, and or two, mislead users by suppressing the notifications that routinely appear when a new communicant joins a chat. So this is impressive stuff that's being lined up by GCHQ, but there's more. The UK spy station will expand its 6,000 strong staff by 600 to 800 people this year and will open a new base in Manchester. Government has committed 22 million to supporting the 650 million development of a cyber park, 326 acres, 7,000 jobs, 1,200 new privileged homes. This is a massive expansion, and we had this weak or lame response from Ian Levy, the technical director of GCHQ. He claimed that the measures were required to stop terrorism, and the World Socialist said this: the reference to terrorism is a fraud. GCHQ's ever-expanding arsenal of surveillance techniques is not fundamentally a response to the extremist networks that are often political instruments of Western imperialism and its allies. It is the ruling class answer to immense social discontent and unrest across the globe, which communication via the internet helps to give international unity and political direction. And David, I will say, I haven't always been a fan of Matt as socialist, but I've got to say that this is an extremely well put together article, and they are highlighting some really dangerous future developments for GCHQ. We've got a world dictatorship building here on the back of Britain, it appears.
It's strange where you find allies these days. I'm finding this too. It's where you get people who believe in something. There's some intellectual ground on which they can stand, and they can actually see some of what's revealing itself as what it really is. They can actually see something clearly. Whereas the people who are compromised, the people who always compromise, Conservative Party, for example, they don't stand for anything. They can't conserve women's toilets. They can't conserve anything, but they call themselves a Conservative Party. And because of this lack of firmness about them, they won't resist anything.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Now, David, let's move on to Jeffrey Epstein. So you've chosen the Daily Beast to highlight this, but and the headline there is Jeffrey Epstein arrested for sex trafficking of minors.
Yes, so this broke on Saturday, and it was the Daily Beast that I think first reported it. So they reported billionaire paedophile Jeffrey Epstein was arrested for allegedly sex trafficking dozens of minors in New York and Florida between 2002 and 2005. He will appear in court in New York on Monday, according to 3 law enforcement sources. Epstein, who owns a New York City mansion and an island in the Caribbean, has been held in a federal lockup in Manhattan ahead of his court date. Saturday's arrest by the FBI and the NYPD Crimes Against Children Task Force comes 12 years after the 66-year-old financier essentially got a slap in the wrist for allegedly molesting dozens of underage girls in Florida. The new incidents, according to 2 sources, will be unsealed Monday, and Manhattan Federal Court will reportedly allege that Epstein sexually exploited dozens of underage girls in a now familiar scheme, paying them cash for massages and then molesting them sexually. So that broke over the weekend. On the subject of fake news, we go to the BBC. The BBC explains who is Jeffrey Epstein. Now, this is an interesting question, but you can rely on the BBC not to come up with any interesting answers. So before the criminal charges, New York-born Epstein was best known as a wealthy financier with connections to the business and political elite. As a young man, he taught mathematics and physics in Manhattan's private Dalton School. He did this apparently without actually having any degrees in either subject, but that's We don't ask that question for the BBC. He moved to finance in 76, working as an options trader for Bear Stearns, and within 4 years was made a limited partner. Right, and he wasn't there for very long. He then went on to found his own financial asset management, J. Epstein & Co., reportedly managing the assets of clients worth $1 billion or more. So he was 4 years as a trader in Bear Stearns, and he had then had access to an exclusively billion-dollar clientele. Oh, there's nothing to see here. We'll not ask any questions because we're the BBC. This is all fine. 1996, his company changed its name to Financial Trust Company and was based in the US Virgin Islands for tax purposes. So that's the full explanation of who he is according to the BBC. Now, the real questions are, who is he? Because he came out of nowhere. He doesn't seem to have any significant sums of money, but lives a lifestyle of a billionaire. And what funds it all? Who is he? These are the interesting questions because you rely on the BBC not to ask them. Other people do, though. And this I thought was extremely interesting because we're talking about the mainstream right in America, which is Ann Coulter's one of the more outspoken members, but she's certainly mainstream. She's in all of the Fox News, MSNBC, all of the mainstream programs, The View. And although she's the representative of, quote, the right, she's very much mainstream. She's saying that he had a state sponsor behind him. And the whole scheme was being used for blackmail purposes, and that means to influence American society at the highest level. Now, that's a different story. You won't find it in the BBC, but that's a different story. And the fact that that's been stated openly by Ann Coulter means it's now common currency in mainstream American politics. Breitbart also reported this. Epstein may have blackmail material on elites with cameras all over his mansions. And then they quote Coulter at length. She said, international leaders and politicians, that's what I think the biggest question is. Who is funding all of this? It seems, and I'm not saying it's true, but one of my theories was that Jeffrey Epstein was like a concierge for an underage sex ring. Rich men would pay him to go to Orgy Island or down to Palm Beach in New York, and he'd arrange sexual liaisons, and they'd pay him to have all these places. He was just like a concierge. Coulter continued, but I don't think there are that many billionaires who have that particular weird sexual fetish. This isn't normal. So you need both hundreds of millions of dollars, a weird sexual fetish, and you're willing to pay Jeffrey Epstein. So it does make you think that there could be a state sponsor behind this. And again, I don't think it's Russia, but let's just say it is to keep the left interested, right? So she's laughing at the "it's my Russians" narrative, but she's talking about an external state sponsor. Now, which state specifically? Well, the Wall Street Journal, so this is all mainstream sources now, the Wall Street Journal reported following Epstein's arrest, the spotlight shifts to financier's longtime associate, Ghislaine Maxwell, British socialite. And of course, there's a consistent suggestion that the Maxwell family was linked to Mossad, right? And we see here the American Herald Tribune asking the question, did paedophile Jeffrey Epstein work for Mossad? So the link that's being asked here is there a blackmail link? Is there an external state sponsor? And is that external state sponsor the state of Israel? These are very interesting questions that could actually change American society quite fundamentally. And they are being asked now in the open and in the mainstream for the first time.
So we come back to, could this all be part of the reason why we see certainly the British deep state desperate to get control of any and every source of media?
Well, exactly. They're losing control. What that shows is that there's a narrative that's coming forward here that they don't want and they can't stop.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry, right, now let's move on to this quite interesting development today. The government, Theresa May, in fact, has announced an Office for Tackling Injustices. The Office for Tackling Injustices will look at disparities in areas including socio-economic background, ethnicity, gender, disability, and sexual orientation, and explore if specific groups of people are unfairly discriminated against or held back from getting on in life. Theresa herself had this to say: deep-seated social injustice requires a long-term focus and cannot be eliminated overnight. That's why the Office for Tackling Injustices will go further, using a power of data gathered from extensive sources to shine spotlight on key injustices and provide a catalyst for better policy solutions. And she said, by holding government and wider society to account, we can create lasting change. So, David, my question to you is, Theresa's leaving her job as Prime Minister. She clearly wants to be viewed as a social justice warrior in the future. But since when was Theresa May or anybody else there to hold wider society to account for anything? I thought wider society was there to hold her to account.
Well, that's what we've been told, Mike. But it seems no. It seems our wise overlords are just there to guide us, not serve us, but guide us into the paths of righteousness. And this is what Theresa's saying here. She's saying social justice, which is group justice, which we get by measuring outcomes and then applying injustice to individual people to equalize those outcomes in some way, is the path of righteousness, and we must walk it, or else, because we're going to have policies, we're going to have behavioral insights team working on this to make us think differently, and we're going to have change, and it's all going to be driven by data. What could go wrong with all of that?
Oh, I can't imagine. It's all good stuff.
Well, quite a lot. I did wonder whether the Office of Injustice had been working locally in Plymouth. This is one of the headlines from Plymouth Live. Former Special Constable had 13,000 indecent images of children. Encourage people, as always, to read the article, but something that jumped out at me was this: handing him a suspended prison sentence. The judge said, in interview, you said you believed you were doing no harm to the children you were viewing. That is nonsense. If people like you did not view this abuse, then it would not be perpetrated. Well, fascinating that because there was a delay of 2.5 years, I believe, in the case, bringing him to sentence, he's ended up with a suspended sentence and walked free. But of course, the headline was wrong, because if you get into the article, this wasn't 13,000 images of children. It included babies being seriously abused. It included animals. And out comes a suspended sentence and he walks free. So just more and more easy to look at our so-called justice system at the moment and see extraordinary decisions, particularly being made by judges. But if we've got an office for injustice, I presume we can expect more of this sort of thing as Theresa May's Conservative government boosts injustice in UK. Seems quite straightforward to me, David, really.
Well, at least Mayors Academy has provided them with the logo for the Department of Injustice and the motto, which is, of course, Injustice Secured.
Indeed.
Okay, well, that probably leads us into justice, and the subject is Tommy Robinson.
Well, yes. So we don't coordinate these articles. It's what comes out on the day, and the state is pushing the protection of journalists. Now, with everything pushed by the state, terms and conditions apply, and the terms and conditions here is except if your name is Tommy Robinson. Now, he's been jailed because of what he did at an outside a court with a live stream broadcast. I watched the live stream broadcast live. I still don't think he broke the law. I think what he was doing was massively unwise, because he was assuming that the precise letter of the law still had some standing in the courts. And what's been revealed, the way that he's been treated, is that just isn't the case. So he's been convicted, and he's saying the T-shirt he's wearing here is convicted of journalism, and I think that's essentially correct. And he's got an extra 66 days when you do all the mathematics. When he got 6 months, there was 3 months previously suspended. They got that added on, and then when you take off time served and early release program, it looks like he's going to be in for 66 days, which is an interesting number. So the journal.ie Irish paper here reports on an appeal he made just before this sentence came in. And it says here, far-right activist Tommy Robinson begs Donald Trump for political asylum following the court retrial. Okay, now we'll pass over the fact that he's not far-right. The interesting bit is what he actually said. I want to make a genuine appeal to President Trump to the Republican Party. Please consider me and my family for political asylum. Now, I heard this, I thought, well, I just can't believe he's not learned more. The Republican Party is not his friend. We need to talk a wee bit more about that perhaps in extra time. It said the British state's appeasement to Islam. Again, that's not the problem, right? The British state's appeasement to Islam is not the problem. The unrestricted waves of immigrants into this country means that they are deliberately persecuting and illegally imprisoning anyone that speaks out against the globalist agenda. Now, that's speaking to part of the problem, but he's not got the bigger picture, and this keeps on being a difficulty, and it's why he keeps on getting into trouble, because lacking a bigger picture of what we're up against, he keeps making mistakes. Now, I was then looking at how this has been covered in the press. The BBC have been appalling on this. If you want to see fake news in action, if you want to see propaganda in action, if you want to see how to do smears, political smears masterclass, the BBC website, and this article in particular, is the one to go to. So Dominic Cassiani says, Tommy Robinson, the rancor, the rhetoric, and the riches of brand Tommy. And he starts off with a photograph of a house that Tommy's selling. And it's got a jacuzzi pool in the garden, all the riches. So he's playing to jealousy and greed. He's playing to every low emotion. It's a fantastic example of how to rabble rouse there from the BBC. And they then go for more fake news. I've got another BBC one because it's a gift that keeps on giving. They write here, Tommy Robinson encouraged, quote, vigilante action in Facebook Live. Now, I watched that. That's not true. That's fake news. That's a lie. But look how the BBC does it. This is how you lie publicly. Ex-English Defence League leader. So you talk about something that happened a long time ago, right? That's a smear. Tommy Robinson encouraged, quote, vigilante action, end quote, against defendants, where he filmed them in a Facebook Live. Judges have said. So it's not the BBC that are lying. No. Judges have said. Right, the fact that it's not true and the fact that the BBC don't hold power to account and they don't question the lies, they just repeat them, doesn't mean the BBC are an instrument of the state and putting out propaganda. No, they're just reporting what the judges said. So it's important to recognise that. Now, it's not just the BBC that are lying. I give you The Sun, the news website of the year. Now, they report, kind of correctly, but it's what they miss out that's key. A furious Tommy Robinson fan attacked a BBC film crew while supporters hurled smoke bombs after the EDL founder, notice they keep on coming back to the EDL, that was a long time ago, was jailed for 9 months today. Now, I watched the video. So this guy here hit a piece of BBC equipment, right? It didn't actually do any damage to any people, but he was certainly angry. And he was then stopped and effectively policed by the crowd who was there to protest in favour of Tommy Robinson. They stopped it and they protected the BBC. There wasn't a policeman in sight. The BBC kind of ran away, but it was the people on the march that stopped the violence and insisted on lawful conduct. So there are people supporting Tommy Robinson who know what this is about. I'm not sure that Tommy himself does, but some of the people out there who are trying to stand up for the rights of journalists and the rights of people to speak and the rights of the country to have the rights of the British to have a country are at least grasping the fact that it must be lawful, the violence.
I think, David, I'm afraid I'm going to disagree with you a little bit here because I think you're being very kind to Tommy Robinson in many ways. I think you're right to criticise the BBC for rabble-rousing in the way they were, but in fact, that's what Tommy Robinson has been doing as well. I'm not saying that all the people that follow him are a rabble, but the fact of the matter is that when he stands outside people's homes in in the middle of England. I can't remember where it was, and screams. In fact, he was standing outside a mosque as well, and screams at the houses and points at the houses across the street and says, "These are enemy combatants." When he in fact doesn't know who's living in those homes, he doesn't know the people that are living in those homes. I think, if there's anybody can be labelled a rabble-rouser, it is him. And I think you're right. He doesn't understand what's going on. Islamic extremism has to be dealt with, but his mechanism for dealing with it is not the right one. And bearing in mind that the key point here is that he is focusing on Islamic rape gangs who absolutely should be in prison for doing what they did. But of course, they are at best a relatively small proportion of the overall problem of child abuse in this country. And so focusing and limiting the discussion to that particular group, in fact, misses the point completely.
I agree with all that you're saying there, Mike, and I am being intentionally kind because the state's just locked him up in a wrongful and unlawful manner. I was looking at some of the things which he'd been saying very recently. There was an interview he gave when it was given before he was sent to prison, but it was obviously given on the assumption that he would be to be played out afterwards. And it was rabble rousing without a doubt. And he was talking about things like, by all means necessary. And it was an extremely emotional call to protect children. And it was focused not on the genuine threat to the children, but only on one aspect of it. And it wasn't calling for race war, but it was very close. Right. And it was massively unwise and really inappropriate, and shows again that he doesn't have a clue what he's up against. And most of the words he was using, there were some bits and pieces, yes, that's true, but most of the overall speech was extremely harmful to the interests of the British people.
Any thoughts?
Well, my thought is that actually he's now starting to learn. I think, of course, he's putting across poor me, but in fact, the treatment Tommy Robinson is getting is treatment that's meted out to hundreds of other people, probably thousands of other people in this country, people who are falsely imprisoned, people who are having their homes stolen by the Court of Protection, people who've got elderly relatives who are essentially killed off in the so-called care system, the cover-up of wider child abuse by the state, all of these things going on around him. And yet Tommy Robinson, for some reason, seems unable to grasp that he's just one small piece of the cog. He's poked a stick into the British state, so the British state's going for him. He's now going to suffer in the way that thousands of other people have suffered at the hand of the state. But he hasn't got any time for those other people. All we hear is Tommy Robinson talking about Tommy Robinson, or this single issue subject to the Asian sex gangs. So until he broadens his base out, I find it very, very difficult to support. Well, would I support him? The answer to that is no, after what I've witnessed. But should he be entitled to justice and proper trials on correct subjects? Yes, absolutely. And on that basis, I think we should still talk about the issue. But I think he's just a single subject guy for whatever reason.
Okay, quick reminder, if you'd like to support the UK Column, you can do that by heading over to the UK Column community website and joining us there. Various options for that. And if you want to watch the Extra Time programme that we produce occasionally after the UK Column news, that's available for members only on the UK Column website, so on the UK Column community website, so do join us if you'd like to. And just a reminder that AV10 DVD is still for sale on the UK Column shop. And finally, a reminder of AV 10.1 taking place on Sunday the 27th of October. Details at alternativeview.co.uk. Brian will be speaking, Graham Downing, a number of others. Tickets available, but tickets going fast for that.
Indeed, and we just put out this 5G awareness events coming up July the 13th. Conway Hall, London, July 15th, Exeter, July 16th, Royal Seven Stars, Totnes, July 18, Turak Hotel, Torquay. These are all very, very good presentations on the dangers of 5G. So if you can get along or help spread the word, please do. Well, do you remember David Cameron? I'm going to say thank you very much to a viewer who pointed this out to us because we'd missed it. It's Daily Express, 1st of June 2019. David Cameron is to work for an American artificial intelligence company. Do you think he's got enough intelligence to work for an intelligence company, Mike?
He might need some enhancement.
He might need some enhancement. The former Prime Minister will lead the advisory board of Affinity, advising on the future of customer service and interpersonal communications.
Yeah,
just brilliant, isn't it?
He was good at that, wasn't he?
He was good at that. So have a read of that article. Let's have a look at the company. Here it is. Last year, Affinity delivered over $1 billion in proven revenue for our clients. What have we got here? Behavioral pairing, we'll come on to that, uses AI to identify subtle and valuable patterns in human behavior. And Affinity uses data and AI to transform the quality of interpersonal reactions. I just want to say, I find that the pictures of very young children all the way through this big business website, I find a little bit disturbing. I don't quite understand how AI and billions of dollars connects with pairs of children. But I'll leave somebody to explain that to me. Let's have a look at the board of directors, some fascinating people. Mohammed Kashki here, the Resource Group. As always, people should have a look at this information for themselves. Jon Snow, 73rd US Treasury Secretary. Very big mix of globalists and high-power political people. Hasnain Aslam, CIO of Resource Group. Jose Maria Aznar, 6th President of Spain. John Sununu, 31st US Senator, New Hampshire. Zia Christie, who's the overall chairman of the company, and Larry Babbio, President, Verizon. Now, have a look at some of these companies. As I worked through the various companies they're connected with, we came into big consultancy, McKinsey's, we came to banking interests, and we came to a lot of medical interests, which I found fascinating. But here's how they see themselves. This is one of the images of them all getting out of a helicopter on the top of a very snowy mountaintop. But there's then a video of these red-suited figures skiing down. So it's a combination of James Bond and the idle rich enjoying getting pieced on the piste. But here he is on the advisory board in black and white. That's their image, looking jolly fearsome and intelligent, I have to say. Maybe
not.
So again, have a look at the people that mixing. This is big business, global business interests, mixing with people from powerful political positions. And here's the overview. Note we've got another couple of little girls in this one. We've got Affinity Enterprise Behavioral Pairing discovers and predicts patterns of interpersonal behavior to optimally pair customers with agents. Now, if I've got this right, if you've got a huge call center, you're dealing with hundreds of thousands or millions of clients by phone, what Affinity will do is provide algorithms based on their collection of data on the individual. So they're out there, they suck in the data on all of us. They work out how we think, how we're likely to react. That's then provided for obviously big money to the client, and the client can then pair a specially prepared agent to speak to us when we call in. So we think we're calling a human being in a company. We do indeed speak to a human being, but that human being's been pre-prepared with AI information as how to interact with us. David, if you talk about 1984, it's already here. This is very dangerous stuff, in my opinion, and it's even more dangerous in that we've got the mix of political people alongside global corporatists.
Yes, and let me just finish this piece by quoting David Cameron, For too long, we have been a passively tolerant society, saying to our people, as long as you obey the law, we will leave you alone.
Indeed. And so we just remind our viewers and listeners that a little while ago it was highlighted that Facebook had taken on Nick Clegg. In this article from The Guardian, there's quite a lot of good statistics. Facebook paid only 7.4 million in tax, despite racking up a record 1.3 billion in British sales. A lot of information about him himself, how he was relocating, and it also pointed out that in the summer, Facebook lost its top policy and communications chief, Elliot Schrage, and Rachel Whetstone. Whetstone is married to Steve Hilton, the political strategist who was a close advisor to David Cameron. So round it all goes in a circle. And this is the latest. Google workers use speakers to listen in on private conversations. So any speaker that's connected in effectively to your computer or the Google system, they're not only listening, but they're then using teams of people to transcribe those conversations. So you're quite safe, really.
Absolutely. Just a little bit of international news to end on, I suppose. This is from the Korea Herald. North Korea changes constitution to make Kim Jong-un the official head of state. That is something that did happen. That is true. But I think later on in the article they describe some more of the constitutional changes, which are perhaps a little more interesting, because the Constitution now says that science, technology, power is the nation's most important strategic resource. That North Korea wants to expand and develop external economic relations, develop external trade, and so on. So the end of the article here says observers see the change as an indication that Pyongyang will place more emphasis on improving ties with other countries to raise its credibility in boosting trade and attracting investment in the face of challenges from global sanctions. So what we seem to be seeing here is a constitutional change in the country, a reorientation of their policy with respect to the outside world, and that seems to be going hand in hand, because this, although this is published by the Korea Herald, it's the story originally came from Yonhap, and Yonhap also elsewhere reported that a source close to the White House, who's working on the negotiations with North Korea, has said that the United States is considering offering a 12 to 18-month suspension of certain sanctions in exchange for the dismantlement of its main nuclear facility and freeze in the entire nuclear program. So it seems like there's movement both from the North Korean side and from the United States. So we watch with interest to see what happens there. And then finally, just a quick reminder, of course, of the Turkey of the F-35 and the issue of Turkey itself. Ankara will not abandon the purchase of Russia's S-400 system. This is the missile defense system, despite US Senate decision to block F-35 supplies to Turkey. This was the Turkish foreign minister saying the US does not want to sell Patriot to us. Tomorrow we may buy another S-400 system. This goes back a couple of weeks, this was said. And we can also purchase other air defense systems. He said if we can't have the F-35 jets, we'll be forced to satisfy our fighter needs somewhere else. Well, indeed, they will be forced to satisfy their fighter needs elsewhere, because they have just taken delivery today of the first elements of the S-400 systems. So they are clearly pressing ahead with this. They're not backing off despite the pressure from the United States. And I guess that means that Turkey will not get the F-35. I'm sure it means that Turkey will not get, or at least the contract will be cancelled for the maintenance of F-35 engines. And so I'm really interested to get a comment from the Ministry of Defence, who are undoubtedly watching this programme, as to where that leaves Britain's F-35s, because Turkey was supposed to be maintaining the engines on our behalf.
Yes, Mike, and what we can expect Turkey to do, of course, is probably buy Russian fighters, possibly Chinese, but I suspect there's another big Russian contract coming in there. David, last comments in the closing seconds.
It's been a very interesting week. We're seeing the concentration on the messages that are going out to the people being ramped up. The state is now openly engaged in propaganda, and that propaganda is global in scale and global in ambition. And that means that to think free and be free and speak free becomes very much the obligation of every right-thinking man and woman.
Indeed, speak out and warn others about what's happening. That's the end of today's news. Thank you very much for joining us. If you like what we do, please consider taking out a subscription and or making a donation. We can only do what we do with your financial support. Thanks for joining us. Bye-bye.
Bye.